to get started, I'll introduce myself. So my name's Alex. As I said, I run Entrepreneur First, and what we do is we help the most ambitious computer scientists and engineers start companies together from scratch. So we've been doing this for about 5 years now. We've helped people build about 140 companies that have been invested in by the best investors from Europe and Asia and the US. And our special focus is on not only helping people find co-founders and building their companies, but also on deep technology. So I'm really excited to moderate this panel and to be working with these amazing people. Heng, do you want to intro?
Hi, Heng, I'm from SGInnovate. Two words, deep tech, early stage, so that's the deep end. We jump right in. Investing, because of the stage that we are involved in, is more than just money. It's a lot of help in various aspects of growing a business from start to start, actually. And yeah, we're at two places, 32 Carpenter Street and in Bash, which many of you will know.
Awesome. XQ?
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Can you hear me? My name is XQ, and I'm the Group President and CEO of Esco Group and also Managing Partner of Esco Ventures. We are a mid to large size Singapore-based company. Products are distributed in over 100 countries. And we have a corporate venture arm, Esco Ventures, and also operate a biotech incubator at Block 71 and just opened one in Beijing. So we are life sciences operating business and also life sciences investments and venture creation. Yeah, both medtech and biotech.
Amazing. Ling?
Hi, good afternoon. Can everybody hear me? Ling, Wavemaker Partners, we are a early stage deep tech enterprise focus fund. We currently have about 80 odd investments, about 20 of which are in deep tech. We don't normally do these types of events, but because we love working with SGI and EF, we did it for y'all. Great people to work with, and we hope to continue to work together.
Awesome. And Pieter?
Hi everyone, my name is Pieter Kemps with Sequoia Capital. Been in the region for about 13 years, and when Sequoia started in the region about 4 or 5 years ago, been starting to invest with Sequoia in the region. We've got about 25 portfolio companies, and work closely with our India fund, across which we have 150 to 200 portfolio companies.
Amazing. Cool. So I thought the first question that we'd ask is, what does it actually mean when we talk about lab-to-market companies? What does it mean when we talk about deep tech companies? These can often feel like buzzwords that are bandied around. So do any of you actually have your own internal definition that you use as an investor to discriminate between lab-to-market companies or deep tech companies and like your traditional tech companies?
Well, I'll take first stab at it. We see our projects coming from EF, obviously, but very often also from the universities and the research labs, as the word suggests, labs. So these are things that possibly have got some public sector grant funding. They may have been at it for a couple of years, could have spent a couple of $1 million also. But we see a lot of them like benchtop types of things. They are not yet fully ready, not yet fully productized. So there's a kind of it ends there, but to get to something, a traditional startup that is investable, that people are willing to put money in, there's work to be done. So the lab to the market. So there's always a gap in between, and we see a lot of those happening. So to me, the stuff that we see out of universities, labs, and things like that, a fair amount from what you produce, actually.
And so when you say that they're kind of coming out of labs, does that mean that they're substantially technically de-risked, or does it mean, you talk about how there's commercialization gap, but is it about that they have this new technology, but it's already de-risked, or is it there's still some way to go on that? Like, how do you feel about that as an investor?
I can say a little bit. I think XQ will also say something on that. Not entirely tech de-risk, because there are some instances where there's still development to be done, tech development. I'm not talking about go-to-market or finding a first customer validation or that kind of stuff. It is about getting the thing to work in the size, in the form factor that we desire it to be. So there's In some cases, yes. In some cases, no. So there's no like one size fits all.
Yeah. SQ, do you want to jump in?
Sure, yeah. So
We can't hear anything that's being said.
Oh, okay. So I'm asking, what does it mean when we talk about deep tech or lab to market companies? So how do you differentiate between what would be a traditional like tech-enabled investment and a deep tech investment?
So, well, classically, obviously, there needs to be, deep IP, patents, obviously, IP is more than just patents. And at least in the life sciences field that I can speak for, I'm really focused on the life sciences field. The types of so-called deep tech investments, they generally deal with, addressing unmet clinical need or unmet medical need. And again, I'm not really expert in the broader kind of tech sense, but it seems to me in the broader kind of tech sense, there is also maybe more of an element of market risk. In our kind of business, it is by definition what we're working on, what we invest in are unmet medical needs, and the risk is, understanding, the biology or, the way in which we can intervene, with the disease pathophysiology to create, a drug or medical device. And there's a lot of biological risk as well in that.
By virtue of being an early stage investor, we typically come in quite early. So a lot of times it is still freshly out of the lab. If I can check and see if my mic is working, can I tell Zolene at the back to flash up a photo that I sent to her? I think that will give you a good... So I will use this as an example from labs. So this came out of NUS. It was a science project, and we invested in the founders who invented this. It's a company called Structo. Yeah. They do 3D printing focused in the dental industry today. But that was not the case when we invested in 2014. We helped them with validating a use case, because obviously when it was in this phase, we were still looking for a use case. We went through the shoe industry, the shipping industry, architecture, and we finally stumbled onto the dental industry. And through that, we helped them through our ecosystem to find a commercialization prospects and help them land one of the largest dental labs in the world as a client. And since then, we continue to help them, be it with fundraising. So for example, we introduced GGV, China-based GGV to them. We continue to help them with commercial advice as they diversify. So as of today, so this was 2014. In 2016, can I see the next photo, please? So this is as it is now. And so there's a very nice before and after. It took us a good year and a half to get there. But this is actually one of the, I guess, how we tend to work with our companies. And we do come in as early as this.
Nice. And Pieter, what makes a company lab to market or deep tech for you?
Yeah, we actually normally don't use the term lab to market, and also don't necessarily distinguish that much.
Right.
The first and biggest question we ask is, is there a big market, and can a big market be created?
Right.
And can this company be successful in that space?
Yeah.
And then if you think about it, there's, any company starts with a problem or a missing. And sometimes that missing is a market missing, and sometimes it's a technology missing. And then it starts with technology first. And what you often see with companies that starts with technology first is they might build amazing technology, but if they can't wrap their head around the business model or the go-to-market model or otherwise build something out of that, then it stays in the lab. And it stays a science project, then it stays, in the case of Structo, with the first picture she showed, right? And only when you have that level of support and have the level of business acumen in the team to move beyond the technology and think like, can this really solve a problem in a market? Is that market big enough? Can we capture that? Can we win contracts, etc.? Then it becomes interesting. On the other hand, what we see more and more is that companies that start with a missing in the market, a market opportunity, start using deep tech down the line.
Right.
Does that make them a deep tech company? Not necessarily.
Yeah.
But if you look at the number of data scientists that now work in Airbnb, a company that Sequoia invested in, it's phenomenal. Or both Sequoia and Wavemaker are in a company called Zilingo, which is a fashion marketplace. They actually started with a very strong technology platform, and the way they've been able to scale and grow very rapidly has a lot to do with the core tech that they've built. I wouldn't necessarily call it a deep tech company, but it is very important. So that's why the lines are blurring, and you can't say you're either this or that and treat it in a different way.
Right.
But I think what's important is that when you invest, you don't invest in just a cool technology at the end of the day. There has to be an inkling that there is a business to be built around that. Otherwise, tech for the sake of tech is a science project.
And so one of the things that I wanted to touch on, which actually relates to a bunch of what you've said so far and some of the questions that we have, are sort of why this sector is exciting, particularly at the moment, for the venture capital community. It feels like over the last couple of years, we've started to see both coming out of the Valley in Europe and Asia, more of an emphasis placed on technology-first companies than we would have expected, say, 5 years ago when lots and lots of money was going into consumer internet at early stages. So why do you think there is that shift?
Barrier to entry, yeah. Well, deep tech companies, right? Yeah, barrier to entry. And yeah, you folks may be better placed to comment on the statistics, but yeah, I think, yeah, large exit potential. And, you know, coming from a, you know, maybe a smaller country like Singapore, notwithstanding the fact that geographical borders are maybe, you know, kind of a out of date kind of concept. But what we can invent and, you know, and build and develop here in Singapore, you know, in the, again, so-called deep tech, you know, field, you know, will be globally scalable. Yeah, is globally scalable. Yeah.
I think what's interesting, what's exciting for us is always being able to build a big business from scratch. And deep tech actually allows you to do that. How do you build a big business? It has to be because it solves a big problem and it's scalable and sustainable. And deep tech allows you to be able to have the ability to do that within a shorter time frame.
Yeah, I think for us it would be the challenges or the problems, the big ones that we see globally, including in the region. So it could be in various application sectors, for example, in finance, in the area of AML or KYC, in logistics as to last mile. You know, Singapore has been always been good in moving things around, right? So there's some inherent advantage there. And in health and all the issues about aging, all right, and it's global. So while we look at the science that is coming out from the labs and the universities and from the entrepreneurs, you know, that go through EF program, we also do not forget the potential as represented by the size of the markets. So I think, and that's happening. So that drives us to say, oh, well, there's a need, right? Let's go find something to go and make it work in the middle and go get the market.
I think one more thing to add, and again, I'm not sure what exactly the definition is that you have in your mind of deep tech versus just, you know, strong technology, right? Which might not be necessarily the same. Isn't like barrier to entry is one thing, but just your ability to scale and drive favorable unit economics is something else. Like imagine a services company where the only way you scale is in a linear fashion. You add one person, one consultant or one lawyer or whatever, and your revenue potential goes up. Compare that to the other end, an Instagram that gets acquired for $1 billion with 12 people, where everything that was scalable was technology. That's a big difference. And in between, there's a lot of, you know, variations on that continuum, from being completely services and people-oriented to adding more tech to automate some processes, to adding even more technology and fully automate workflows, collaboration, self-service, signups, et cetera, to leveraging AI, machine learning, and other things to, you know, get the best of that and be as, you know, be as capable as possible to scale in a non-linear fashion. And that will not just impact how fast you can grow, but also what customer experience you give. The fewer people needed in that process, the better normally your economics look. So it impacts quite a few things if you think about it.
Yeah. And so to sort of touch on the top two questions that are currently from the audience. So when you're looking at making investments into technology-first companies, deep tech companies, whatever, what are the main things that you look for in trying to figure out whether or not they're likely to be successful? I can imagine one of those things will be team, and so maybe you can talk a little bit about what you look for in a founding team for companies like this, and how you see that team evolve over time as the companies develop, particularly in your case, Pieter, where you support them, you know, from Series A onwards. Heng, do you want to start?
Yeah. If our starting point is technology, we will look at how deep the entrepreneurs are in that particular domain. All right. It is unlikely that we will be able to help them in the technology itself, like in material science or in quantum physics. All right. I don't have a staff of physics guys with me, right? So they have to bring with that. But I think then the drive, the ability to work as a team, and what we sense as the ability to work with partners, investors like us ourselves, and especially when we position ourselves as value adders. All right, they may know the science, but there are a lot of things that they don't know, and this is from experience, after having done this for a number of years. So that, that kind of, I would say, I would generally describe that as a good starting point for us.
Is there a particular founding team that you've worked with that you feel exemplified the kinds of teams that you look for?
Wow, let me think.
Okay,
go to
have a think.
I've actually had, one of our successful investments. It was a European medical device company. It was actually 3 founders, and they actually divided the shares equally among themselves. One was more of the inventor, another guy was kind of, it was a medical device company. So one was kind of the inventor, the other guy was software, electronics, and the third guy was kind of a manufacturing, manufacturing operations kind of person. So saying the obvious, obviously in the teams that we invest in, we look for people with, some kind of obsession or X factor. You're going to hit the wall many times, right, in this business, and you need to, hit the wall and turn and hit the wall and turn, right? Eventually you make it. And obviously, the teams that have complementary, skill sets. And teams that, are humble, and will, we want to give advice. Obviously, it's for them, to decide, what they want, what they will actually implement. Yeah.
For us, especially for deep tech companies, you will have, of course, the tech is prime, right? It's very important, so you need to have a good scientist. But the scientists, products just don't sell themselves. We need to have people who can also do the sales and marketing. And so if you can't turn your scientist into a hustler, you've got to be able to make sure that he's okay with you looking to hire a hustler for him, because being able to communicate that product to the marketplace is the only way that this product survives and thrives. So having a scientist and the commercial aspect is also very, very important for us. And at Wavemaker, we also, it may sound very corny, but we do like founders who we think are trustworthy. And what is that trustworthy function is? It's a function of credibility, reliability, authenticity, with as small a dose of self-interest as you can find. And of course, this is a two-way street. We want to be that way to our founders, and we expect our founders to be the same.
It's tough to, there's a lot of founding teams that are very different and somehow make it work. And that is true for, for founding teams of deep tech companies or other companies. It's always the case. It's always a lot of human element. Other than the founding team, we also look at the wider team. And we sometimes have companies pitch to us and say that they've built this amazing technology and that they're super scalable and super advanced and it's full of AI, ML, other nice buzzwords. And then we ask them, how many people have you got? 70. How much of them are engineers? 4. Then we start quickly losing, losing faith in all the claims that were made. Whereas you see companies, some of the companies we invested in, I remember Sequoia invested in a company called Nugget here in the region, and when they had 18 people, I think 16 of them were engineers, and several of them had PhDs or MBAs or whatever. Yeah. Sorry, not MBAs, but master's degrees in comp science, etc. So that ratio, what that team looks like, shows what the founder has been hiring for. Even if the founder is not an engineer himself, if he basically is a tech-focused founder and a product-focused founder, he'll hire in that way. And instead of 2 engineers and then 20 sales guys, not necessarily a wrong thing, but a different profile, and then you assess that business in a different fashion as well.
What do you think are the pros and cons, I guess, related to, obviously there are lots of different types of founding teams, but related to your point, what do you think are the pros and cons of having technical CEOs versus non-technical CEOs? So we work with a lot of people who come from PhD programs, and typically they have some kind of well, sometimes they have some internal anxiety about whether or not they can be the business guy or whatever. How do you think about that as investors?
I think in our case, we are working on venture creation and early stage investments. So by definition, our founders, our entrepreneurs in residence, our fellows, they all have PhDs. They need to come, with this deep, biological or chemistry, or life science kind of background. Because of the stage that we are playing at, to be honest, the business expertise is a little bit overrated. And then, with our kind of incubation model, this is anyway something that we bring to the table. What we focus on, that we find, with these folks that come out of, especially they come out of academia, is helping them to understand the right problem to solve, with their technical background. What are the, in our lingo, unmet medical needs. There is a universe of unmet medical needs, but there is a subset which, are fundable, are, that large VCs, that large, multinational pharmaceutical companies are interested in, So that's, when we bring these kind of folks in, that's the first thing that we try to indoctrinate them on. Yeah.
If I may jump in, and it kind of connects to the question that I owe you an answer, right? And my answer kind of connects with what XQ has just said. Example of entrepreneur team. We have been working on this project for the last maybe 6 to 9 months to get it to where it is at, where we make a formal start at it, and we're going to be putting money and effort for the next almost 2 years. So this is a medical device. There's a doctor, Dr. Ling, who runs who's a private practice in the ENT field. The other co-founder is a professor of mechanical engineering in NUS. All right, so these two creators of the idea, they are unlikely to come out and become the full-time entrepreneur, but they have the science, they have the ability to, they know the need, from the clinician. Obviously there's a need, right? And she sees it, she has gone out to the third world countries and see how that need can be met with a new device. And they're also good listeners, right? They're all accomplished, in their own respective fields, but they're all good listeners. And on my team and the guys in this room, we have my value adder, my chief value adder in this project, who is already acting like an interim CXO for the company. So in a combination of these things, what the founders themselves bring, right? The science, the real science, and the practical kind of feedback, as well as what we can bring to the table in order to map the development path and the go-to-market path. And in this instance, it's a regulated product, the regulatory path. So it tells me that's a good mix.
Pieter, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think I fully agree in the sense that they might be great scientists, but if they are just too much in the weeds and they can't take that step back and keep the overview and understand some other elements, you are in trouble. Imagine you have a chief scientist or a PhD come to you and he pitches like a hustler and he's super slick. You also start feeling like, I'm not sure if I can trust this guy, right? It's not what you expect. And sometimes we see guys that are the PhD founders, and we have quite a few in our portfolio. They're successful even in sales pitches, not because they're good sales guys, but just because they're so credible and they understand their stuff so well. And when they talk, even if they talk, slow or not very articulate, like people listen and they get buy-in. So I think that is important. They have to be themselves and be good at what they do and win respect because of what they do. And then obviously be honest in where they lack skills. And as you were saying, build a team around you. Like no company is one man, right? It's always the band. And can the founder bring the band together and orchestrate that band in the right way? And that's a very different skill set.
I think that really resonates with me. I mean, one of the things that we've noticed at Entrepreneur First when we're kind of matching, or rather when people are finding their co-founders on EF, is that actually, even in the case where the company has some extremely strong technology that is being built around, it really helps if the CEO is technically literate. They don't necessarily have to understand the technology to the same extent as their CTO. But on the other hand, like that credibility when you're selling a product which is supposed to be based on something which is genuinely innovative, the credibility has to be there. And so sometimes the best founders, best CEOs, best people at selling the stuff, the people who really, really get it, because otherwise it just doesn't seem authentic.
Yeah. Actually, we sometimes run into people who hide behind the jargon, and that's really, that's a very big red flag for us. You need to be able, if you can explain, because you are creating a new product category in many times in deep tech, right? And so being able to explain your product is very important. Because if you can't sell it to anybody with the exception of a PhD in a particular, in spectrometry, for example, you're not going to be able to sell your product to anybody else. And so that's very important. You're not going to be able to raise financing with most people. So it's, when you create a new product category, it's really not, and I'm referencing Geoffrey Moore's Crossing the Chasm now. There's going to be a bunch of early adopters who can who are tech visionaries, who love the tech and who buy the product. But then after that, what? How do you leapfrog from the early adopters to the majority? And that's when your ability to articulate your product and be able to commercialize it is very important.
Since it's a public question, we should ask it. So why do you invest or not invest in sole founders? And particularly, depending on the type of the company, does that affect your decision?
I think it's riskier. Right? In most cases, a team is needed. Yeah. The technical expertise, the kind of, in our case, perhaps the clinical expertise, as opposed to the scientific expertise, and then, regulatory expertise. It's, in life science, it's complicated business. Yeah.
I agree. I think the companies that have failed in our portfolio so far have been around single founders, so we learned our lesson.
Yeah, actually it's true for us. So because of our model, we essentially allow people to try lots of different co-founding pairs. And it means that we have more than 1,000 people have done EF. We have lots of different permutations of co-founding pairs that we have data on. And I think in the entire EF portfolio, there's maybe 2, maybe 3 sole founders that have actually made it through that process. So maybe I don't have the reason, but I definitely have empirical data that suggests it's hard.
In all honesty, I often think it's not as binary.
Okay.
And what I'm trying to say is, the question is not do you invest in a single person. That's a different question. It's a single founder. So a single founder, but still with a team. And what I've seen, like one of our portfolio companies where I serve in the board, has 170 people right now, more than $10 million of revenue, sole founder. But the early guys that were around him felt like co-founders, are still there. I've been with the business for 5 years. So technically it's a single founder. Have I ever seen this company as a one-man show? No, never. It's very much a team effort. So that's why I said earlier as well, it's about that team and whether, on your term sheet it says one guy as a founder or 2, or another company we work with has 5 as founders, which has other dynamics. Again, it's not as binary. You always have to look at the team and how that one founder has built the team around it, has built the support, etc.
For sure. We have a portfolio company called Open Cosmos, which is one of my favorite EF companies. They essentially make it easy for people to deploy things in space. And that was a similar scenario where one of the guys came to us and he'd been working on something related to that for a while. And so for him, it was more a case of like identifying that early team, that kind of a founding team as opposed to the traditional co-founding pair. And it really, really works.
Yeah.
Okay, so
what we have also seen, if I just add one more point, is in fact we are kind of circling on this specific topic for one of the investments that we are considering right now. Even down to how the primary founder or founders has distributed equity to the co-founders. Yeah, this is quite important and quite telling. One of our most successful companies, I shared the example briefly just now. The founder actually split the equity with 2 of his co-founders, 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. And yeah, you need all hands on deck. Yeah. So I wouldn't be opposed to single founder, but then I think it's very important the team around him or her, and also how options or how the rest of the team felt incentivized.
I think that is often a very delicate issue. Yeah. We see this where sometimes there's a particularly strong founder who can be very ungenerous with equity in the early stages when they need people to cooperate with them. And finding that balance can be a real challenge.
Yeah.
It's sort of not, it's definitely not the case that in every team you need an equal split in the kind of ideal world. But I think deviation where you have massive equity differences can end up being very painful down the line. So great question on intellectual property management. This is something that I'm sure, especially in the medtech environment, you spent a lot of time thinking about. So how important is that? How do you manage it, especially at the early stage when most of the time you want to be out actually testing things in the market? How do you think about IP?
So yeah, in life sciences field, first of all, it's important to differentiate between medtech and biotech. So biotech, drugs, therapeutics, molecules. Medtech, medical devices, right? Everything else. In the biotech field, then IP is absolutely critical. The gold standard, is what is known as composition of matter, for your actual drug, compound. In the medical devices field, it's important, but it's, usually in medical devices, the IP is not watertight, right? In the case of biotech with the molecule, you actually patent the structure, the chemical formula or sequence of the molecules, or the molecule. And in biotech, this is absolutely critical, Yeah, in medtech, it's important, but yeah, it's, usually there are ways to get around these patents in any case. Yeah, there are other barriers to entry. Yeah. But in general, in life sciences, it is, yeah, it's very important, investors do look for it.
Thanks, Jim. Do you want to talk about this?
Yeah, I would agree. Background, foreground IP, when we jump in, say the example that I quoted just now from the university, half from the university and half from the private practitioner. There's a couple of IP, couple of pieces of IP there, full patents already in place. So it does not belong to the team. They have to make use of it. So there must be some management as we engage, as we kind of put money into it. We've got to be sure as to the rights, the obligations, for the background IP, and in the foreground, what's going to happen thereafter, who's going to take what, and how much money you're going to give to the royalties and all kind of stuff. So important to make sure you have that considered.
How do you think about IP at a slightly later stage? Is that something that you think about a lot, do a lot of DD on, or is it not important?
I think you think about the quality of the tech and the differentiation of that technology, less so about patents, etc. There's all sorts of drawbacks as well of filing patents and actually disclosing what you're working on. So it's not, like, we look at it, but it's not a key thing. We look more about how strong is that technology and does that technology show impact, right? That more than have you got a very strict IP policy or patent approach or something like that.
Yeah, I do agree. I think particularly at the very, very early stages, one of the things that we see in the founders that we work with is a tendency to use intellectual property or IP patenting from like a defensive perspective in this sort of world where they are going to defend themselves against Google or whoever coming in and doing stuff, and it's just completely implausible. Like, no startup is ever going to win that war. Whereas I do think it's possible to think about IP from the perspective of an offensive move. So, like, how do you actually create value by working in areas that are going to be valuable in the future, and how do you demonstrate that you've done that, as opposed to how do you protect yourself against other people doing the same thing? It almost never works like that.
Yeah. I mean, I go back to my structure example because it's a good one. They don't, IP is really not the be all and end all for them. So you've got the printer, which other people can make, but then they also have a material, the resin that is used to make the dental molds for the industry. And if you use a different kind of resin, it doesn't work on that printer. So it's the cartridge business, the materials business that makes it a differentiator and has proven to be a barrier to entry as opposed to a particular IP.
Sure. I suppose a question that I have for you is whether you see IP in the long run as being something which can be a defensibility story for a company at all. Like, is it actually possible to build a company purely on that basis? Doesn't feel like it to me, but it seems like something we see a lot with people bringing stuff out of labs.
I think in life sciences, yes. Yeah, in life sciences, yes. The large, pharmaceutical or medical device companies, they will not risk infringing, IP. They will, right? And you even see tactics, that startups can also employ, right? You file a lot of patents, right? You put a lot of claims out there. You drag on prosecution of the claim so that the large company doesn't know whether it's going to get granted or not, but then you can leverage this in like M&A discussion. Yeah. So I think it's very valid in life science. Maybe it's different.
It's sector dependent.
Yeah, it's sector dependent. I was on the witness stand for a case of a defendant in an IP lawsuit some time ago in the field of robotics. So we are dealing with a lot of robotics. There are plenty of robotic startups now. So it's not so clear cut. So there are smart ways to get around it, to skirt around the issue, and with a MNC being the plaintiff and a small Singapore company being the defendant. We won. You have to be smart about what you are trying to do and your approach, and know what to step on, what not to step on.
Okay, let's talk about use cases. How important are seeing use cases before making an investment? I guess especially for technology-first companies, how does that work?
Great if they can bring use cases that are validated. That brings it several steps ahead in terms of the process of do you want to make an investment or not. But in many cases where for firms like us and others who build businesses, we bring the use cases also to the founders. Case in point, one of your companies from batch one in the robust communication in harsh environments, we brought use cases to the table, and actually they are pursuing these use cases on a commercial basis now. So it kind of is a mixed bag. I won't say it's one or the other.
Certainly for a seed fund for us, it's not always obvious what the use cases are, as the famous structure example shows, but then there are others in which there are use cases already. But very often also it pivots into something else, right? It may work up to a certain point in a certain industry, but you may need to find a different beachhead over time. So it's not always, your first use case may not necessarily be the use case that makes the business sustainable. So there are different ways. I think it's not that binary neither.
Pieter, have you seen use cases change over time for your portfolio companies in interesting ways? Like how do you evaluate that? Okay.
Always. It rarely stays what it is when you invest. We sometimes refer to this, and actually it's different in some markets, right? If you think about the US, the market is more mature. What we're seeing happening there with companies is much more linear. So they start out as a SaaS company, they know where they want to go, and they're trying to execute in a fairly linear fashion. Here it's very different. We often refer to this as race versus maze. In the US, it's a race. You go there, and who's faster, etc. Here, it's a maze. It goes, if we look at, Gojek, for example, how they evolved when Sequoia led the Series A, we didn't know it was going to be a large payment platform. A company now known as Fave started out as a fitness platform that was basically subscription. Now they're not subscription. They're largely food and beverage and entertainment and lifestyle, etc. Completely different model. They have a payment and a loyalty and a cashback product. And we had no clue just 2.5 years ago that it would evolve into this. So more often than not, do we see use cases differ. Often some of the first use case might still be there in whatever variation, but all sorts of things left, right, center are evolving around it.
And does that happen just because there's more space, as in it's less saturated with people trying stuff, or do you think it's something?
Well, I think one of the main success factors or criteria ultimately for a startup is the rate of experimentation. How fast can they experiment, and how fast can they learn and adapt? And from that, you'll see certain things that work. So in the case of KFit, there were certain things in the initial business model that didn't work. So that told them something. But there were also certain things that were working. People were saying like, hey, we don't want to just book for tomorrow. We want to book, or we don't want to do just subscription. But sometimes we just want to try something. And hence, shall we do just not just subscription, but also pay as you use? And they started doing that. A lot of adoption. People said, hey, I don't want to just book for tomorrow. I want to be able to book in real time. So now it's booking real time. Then they said, hey, I don't want to just do this for fitness and sports related things, but why not for broader health and well-being and salons and spa and massage and whatever. And then people said, hey, this is actually nice. Why can't I do that for other stuff? And so you start building on and learning and looking at where customers are pulling you sometimes, right?
Yeah. So we're running out of time, but it's actually a nice way to finish is, what's the best way for an entrepreneur to contact a VC fund? Maybe specifically your fund. How would that work? Heng, do you want to start? How should people get in touch? Through an intro or cold email?
No particular way. I think we are open. We try to be as to accept queries and things like that. You know, the first approach usually leads to just an intro. It's after that takes place. And and we are active. We don't sit back and wait for things to come. It's more like we reach out to the labs, to you, and to find the kind of stuff that we want, that we are interested in.
XQ, how should people get in touch?
Well, I mean, classically, of course, some kind of warm introduction. But if not, LinkedIn is a great tool. Just reach out, You can send in-mail or try and connect, Yeah, I think most people are very open. Yeah.
Go via EF and SGI and then come to us.
And then it comes to us.
Yes, and then it comes to you. Yeah, but yeah, so jokes aside, I mean, there are many different ways in which you can reach us.
Food chain.
Cold call, warm calls.
Pieter, what about you?
Some direct reach out has worked if you do it in a nice way, but we also realize that an important strength of a founder is his ability to hustle, his ability to network. The world is so transparent right now, it's very easy to find out who have we invested in, who have we co-founded or co-invested with, etc. So if folks are not able to find a warm intro, that it can still work, and we've still made investments based on cold outreach, but it is not as strong as them having hustled their way in your network and then through a warm intro.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. It's been super interesting. Hope you've enjoyed it too. Thanks, team.
Thank you.
Thank you.